Hello. So you will know if you've been with me for a while that I shared a video called My Journey Part 1 back in, it must have been, I think it was like October or September or something last year. And now has come the time for me to share My Journey Part 2. And I had all these ideas in my head about when I was going to share this part 2 because as I've shared before, I am moving and I really wanted this video to be a kind of closure and to be when I was imminently about to leave the country. And unfortunately, it's not even unfortunate, it's just that's the way I'm still kind of processing or framing it in my mind. I would have ideally liked to have left already. And there are certain things that need to fall into place before I can do that. And so I'd kind of been putting it off, even though I knew the universe was calling me to do this video. And it kept popping into my head. And then I had several messages from people in a really short space of time being like, hi, I'm just wondering like where my journey part 2 is, or if you're thinking of doing one. And I was like, oh my God, the call is obviously so loud, but it wasn't fitting in with the frame of when I wanted it to. And so I'm kind of just surrendering and just acknowledging the call of the universe to do this now, as opposed to when I had sort of wanted to egoically in my own mind. So I would probably recommend, if you haven't watched My Journey Part 1, that you probably watch that so you have a little bit of context, because I'm not going to be going over too much of what I was talking about in the first video, maybe a little bit of a recap. But that video was kind of going over my childhood and the sort of, as we all have our own sort of complexities around our childhoods. And I was sort of going over my experience of growing up in Scotland and being mixed race. And I think I touched on different sort of ancestral things and my sort of mid childhood and then my teenage years. And I think I pretty much stopped at the point where I had sort of talked about my experiences of going into prostitution in my late teens and my difficulties with sort of substance abuse around that time. And I think I pretty much just left it there. What a cliffhanger. So this is me kind of going from that point and taking it up to where I am now, or roughly where I am now, which is I'm now 30 years of age, turned 30 this year. And yeah, and I suppose going into my sort of poetry career and my sort of healing work and things like that. So yeah, I'm sort of like, where exactly do I begin? And I also just want to say as well, because I have this thing in my head where I have this like fear of sharing too much about myself, or that people will think I'm self-obsessed, or I've always had this thing in my head about that, or from a young age anyway. And it's kind of ironic because I love hearing people's stories. Like I find nothing more interesting than people's backstories and where they've come from. And, it's such a human thing to be curious about that and to want to share your own story. And so as I've kind of, in the last sort of however long since I've been considering doing my part 2, I've been like, oh, nobody even wants to hear about that stuff anyway. And, going over that kind of way of thinking about it, but then also having to sort of surrender and acknowledge that actually I find people's stories really, really interesting. So if I'm feeling called to share mine, then there's possibly a reason why, and maybe it has some keys and codes for other people, or yeah. So I suppose just going back to where we left off, which was, around the age of sort of 18, 19, I entered into prostitution. And this was within the context of having just left a very abusive relationship, and my partner was imprisoned for everything that he had done to me, or not everything. He was meant to get imprisoned for attempted murder, and they couldn't get him on all of those charges, and so he ended up actually serving like a much shorter sentence for sort of common assault. And we broke into my house and breaking and entering, and I think like racial harassment or something as well. So at the point I went into prostitution was when he was in prison. And my thinking behind it at the time was, one, I had no money. Two, I had substance abuse issues that I, really was using at that time just to cope with everyday life. I also was recovering from a really severe injury with my leg where I had, which was inflicted by that partner, where I had internal bleeding in my leg, and I'd, had my ribs broken, and, he'd stabbed me with a screwdriver. It was a mess, and so I was trying to just deal with this immense post-traumatic stress disorder, essentially, if you want to put it in a sort of medicalized diagnosis. I was dealing with such insane amounts of trauma, and no one around me could really, as much as people tried to support me, it was like I was just so deeply fucking traumatized. And it's interesting as well, because I've really been reflecting on that recently, because my youngest brother has just turned 18. And I've just, been spending time with him, and I'm just like, you're such a baby. Like, you're just a big baby, and it's been, in all his beauty and his wisdom, but he's still 18. And so then looking back, it's really been making me reflect on being that age and everything that I was dealing with at that time. And it's really been such a weird mirror, and I've sort of had to reconcile so much around that particular age. And I think it's, I've gone through different periods of my healing journey, and it's almost like the older you get, the wiser you get, the more perspective you have on your younger self. And so I've just really been like having to sort of hold that part of me and sort of witnessing it in just a sort of deeper, more reflective kind of way. And so, yeah, at the point that I made the decision that I was going to start selling my body, essentially, I was just broken. I really had thought I loved this partner, and I'd also been in an abusive relationship prior to that. So it was really a case of like, I'd gone from one abuser to another, which is really, really common, actually. And, I'd always sort of struggled with friendships and just fitting in, and always feeling really different. And so it was sort of like this guy that I met just made me feel really, really good. And, it was like whenever we would go out together, people would just come up to me and be like, oh my God, you're so beautiful. And, because I felt like I was glowing, from the inside, which I don't think I had ever really experienced before. I had never felt that someone loved me like that, even though now I know that you can't love someone and treat them in the way that he treated me. But we had this amazing 2 months of, what felt like pure bliss, and, spent sort of every day together. And, I had my own flat. I moved out when I was 17 into this big high-rise council flat block. And, I felt like I was living in a sort of, a fantasy or a dream, which I suppose I was. And, it all kind of came crashing down when he just lost his temper at me one day, which he'd never ever done before. And so it was just this very uprooting, frightening kind of thing. And, the violence just progressively got worse. But he would always apologize and cry. And, and I sort of blamed myself. And, it was just a whole thing. And, him being much older than me as well, him being sort of 26, 27 when I was 18, is something that just also really, as I've got older, I've found more and more disturbing. So I'm like, that's so young. That's such an inappropriate age gap. I think that at certain ages, that kind of gap of like 8 or 9 years is a lot. You go through so much from your early 20s from your late teens, to your late 20s. It's like such a pivotal time. And so, yeah, I made the decision that I was going to go begin working at a brothel. And I didn't think about it in terms of the sort of, I knew that it wasn't like good. I knew it wasn't like a good idea, but it wasn't, I didn't care about myself. And that's something that I am really sort of, passionate about. If people ever kind of bring this up with me or anything like that, is that I don't believe that any women go into prostitution because that's their highest timeline of evolution, or that's their highest pinnacle of what they can be in terms of their like career or what they have to share or their purpose. And I find a lot of the sort of legitimization around prostitution really like concerning. As someone who was involved in it, I don't think that there is ever a way that is okay, or that any woman's highest calling is to sell her body, and I know that from being around so many amazing women that were just all so very deeply traumatized. I mean, working in a brothel, in my experience, is like working in a nut house. And it's just, you're just all together in this madness of trauma. And I have such like hilarious memories of times with the women that I connected with there, who we all sort of just bonded over this, what we were putting ourselves through, and the difficult experiences that we would have with men, and the rates of like women who end up in prostitution who were sexually abused as children is like astronomical. And there was just always so much chaos. Maybe nut house isn't like the most PC term, but it was absolute chaos, and kind of under the guise of like an industry, essentially, something that is sort of a sort of a professionalism almost. There's rules and regulations that you have to uphold, but at the same time it's just so wrong. All of it is so wrong. And I'm still friends with some women that I met through that work, and just seeing how we have all had to go through this like really deep healing journey and sort of move through so much trauma. I don't think that anyone who has been raised with like really high levels of self-esteem and self-love will ever go into a job like that, and there's just such imprints that leaves on you. And now when I sort of reflect on it, and I'm like, oh my God, I was like 19, 20 years old when I was involved in that, and had just didn't understand in its fullest capacity what that was actually doing to me. And I really remember having discussions with women that I was working with, and I was sort of having this sort of notion of like it almost being blood money, because you can't hold money, you can't retain that kind of money. It's weird. It was like just strange. It was like there was a sort of understanding amongst some of us that this was like negative karma almost, that this was like bringing more chaos into our lives, that as we were participating in this kind of stuff, we were also drawing in more chaos into our lives. What you put out comes back to you, and if you are treating this vessel as disposable and putting it in dangerous situations, then that you will draw in more of the same. And that was very much the case with me. I just progressively ended up in more and more dangerous situations, and ended up on a number of occasions almost by the skin of my fucking teeth ending up in situations where I would have been trafficked. So it's like, it's just, yeah. It's a really terrifying industry. And when I see people sort of legitimize it, and there's that sort of whole debate about whether you call it prostitution or you call it sex work, and that sort of idea that calling it sex work legitimizes it as work, when this is like on such a on such a soul level, this is something that is so like terribly negative for people on both ends, for the men that are purchasing and for the women that are selling. And for me, I know that I was living out an ancestral pattern, and if I had to guess, I would say that probably a lot of the women that I was working with were probably doing the same, because there's prostitution within my family, so other women before me have engaged in that I wasn't even necessarily aware of until I got older. And it was like, okay, so this has been a pattern of of ancestral heritage. Essentially, it's epigenetic, that if certain things that your ancestors experience, you too will experience, unless that karmic code is sort of rewritten. So it really took me to a point where I had ended up in so many dangerous situations. I had been sexually assaulted, I had been raped, and it took me to a point of those really horrific things happening to me before I decided to leave. And I they call it the game for a reason. It's like you come away from prostitution, you get drawn back in. You come away, you get drawn back in. And so that is, it took me a while. It's like an abusive relationship. It takes you a while to leave. And so, I sort of did escorting and things like that. But one of the really pivotal things for me, which caused me to leave, was I discovered writing. I discovered poetry. And I had always loved that kind of stuff at school. Let me correct that. I had loved writing stories and stuff at school. I was not interested in poetry at school at all, which is hilarious now to me. But I was sacked from a place that I was working. And I used to travel. I think I did go through this in my part one, if you want to hear about it in more detail. But I used to travel around the country working at all these different brothels. And I got sacked. And I think partially, or in fact fully, I had such bad PTSD that with certain men especially, maybe something had triggered me or whatever, I would just be so rude to them, which obviously is not good for business. And I think I'd had like more than one complaint during this shift. I don't even think I was fully employed there. I think it was like a trial shift. Anyway, I got sacked, and I was like so upset that I had not sort of gained full employment at this place. And I was like crying my eyes out. And in retrospect, it wasn't really about that, what had happened. It was like just everything, and I hadn't even begun to process my first abusive relationship, let alone my second. And I was such a mess, poor thing. And so I was crying, and I remember I had bought this notebook, and I still don't know where it came from within me, but it was like I couldn't do anything else. It was like I was going to implode, and I just started writing. And it was, I must have almost filled up the notebook or half the notebook or something that night, but I just couldn't stop writing. And it was all of these poems. They all rhymed. They all had this rhythm to them. It was just like something just unlocked within me, and it just, from then I just couldn't stop. And all these poems were sort of about the abusive relationships that I'd been in, particularly the one where I was hospitalized numerous times. And I just kept writing. And it was like I found something within me that was, I was sort of good at. And I'd never really, really had that before. Like I was always kind of good at stuff at school. Like I was skipped a year in high school and things like that. Like I was good at doing the stuff, but I wasn't passionate about it. I didn't love it. And so this was like, it was all me. It was all, it was just, I loved the creativity of it. And I'm a Pisces sun, I'm a Pisces stellium, in fact. And I'm a fifth house Pisces stellium for the astrologers in the house. You'll know that that's all about creativity. And I think that maybe if I believe everything happens in perfect divine timing, but I think, that was what I enjoyed doing when I was young, was drawing and writing, and I'd completely lost that. I'd kind of forgotten that was a big part of who I was, and I had replaced that with drugs and men and sex, and so I had gone on this total journey of just losing myself and living out this sort of what is a lot of what I came to understand as I learned to come into deeper communication with my ancestors and understood how to read the Akashic records and all of that kind of stuff. I kept seeing how this was like a karmic legacy, essentially, that I was living out, which was abusive relationships and prostitution, and that was written. That was written. My mom's ancestry is from the transatlantic slave trade. That was a lot of what was going on at that time, and so that's what I was playing out. And I also talk about that in my video about being like a walk-in soul and things like that, but I'll probably get onto that later. So although I did keep having these sort of dalliances with prostitution and escorting and things after that, I sort of realized, like, okay, this has got to come to an end, or like I'm gonna die. That was essentially the point where I got to, was like, the universe is really showing me that I am ending up in so many dangerous situations, and I keep escaping by the skin of my teeth. And cats only have 9 lives, so it's not going to be that way forever. These are warnings, and they're warning you to get the fuck out of this. And so I left, and I think as well at one point I think I'd maybe already left prostitution, or maybe I was escorting or something like that. But at one stage my parents did stage an intervention because I had become so thin. I remember my dad hugging me, and he just burst into tears, and he was like, "You feel like you're about 10 years old. Like, what the fuck is going on with you?" kind of thing. And my parents were aware of the, to an extent of, they knew that I'd been hospitalized, I couldn't hide that from them. They were aware that I was in an abusive relationship. They were aware of all the police stuff and, all of that. My mom was very, very involved in that, and, had taken me to hospital when my leg had happened, and all of that kind of stuff. But it was, they weren't fully aware of all of the prostitution stuff. I have spoken to them about that now, and they're loving and supportive of me and can understand why I ended up in those situations, but they weren't fully aware of everything at that time. And so they were obviously aware that I was heavily abusing drugs, because they were like, it's hard to hide that at a certain stage. That's what you look like you're doing, essentially. So I decided at that point, right, I'm gonna stop abusing drugs every day. And that was really, it was hard, but it was also, I also just knew that I was gonna die. So it was one of those things where it was just like, I've had that in my life before, where it's just like, it comes to that crunch, and you're just like, it's a crossroads. It's either this way or that way, and there's no two ways, but there's 2 ways about it, which is this way or that way. And so I decided that I was going to stop taking drugs every day. I still like smoked a copious amount of weed, and I was still taking sort of downers, like sort of Valium and things like that, but nowhere near the extent of what I was doing before. And I bought a bike. So this would have been like, when was this? This would have been like, it's been 2014 maybe. So, and I remember I bought a bike and I was like cycling around everywhere. And I was like, really, I started painting and started painting all of these artworks that were very ethereal. And that was kind of how I spent my time. I didn't even have Wi-Fi in my flat. I just used to, just spend a lot of time just getting stoned and just painting and then going out cycling. And, I was trying to live a more wholesome life. And that definitely lasted a while, but the sort of allure of partying and things like that kind of came back. And so I never went back to that stage with drug abuse that I was as bad as that sort of like everyday hardcore drug abuse. I never quite went back to that, but I did used to go on binges, like bad binges. Like you wouldn't see me nobody would know where I was for days. And I always had this thing where I could just stay awake. Obviously, drugs help with that, but even people that I was with would stop, and I'd be like, okay, I'm moving on to the next party then, and I would just, it was not. I couldn't switch off, and I think that was definitely part of the PTSD as well. Was just I was running, I was running from myself essentially. And so later that year, I sort of realized like, okay, what am I going to do? Like I can't keep kind of dipping into escorting and things to sort of, make money and things like that. Like I have to commit to something. And so I applied for college and, I left school with no qualifications because this will probably only make sense to Scottish people, but because I was skipped my standard grades to do my hires, and then I left before I did my hires, I left with no qualifications whatsoever. So I applied for an Access to Uni course, which I don't even know if they still run them, but it's basically like the equivalent of doing all your sort of higher grades, and then you can sort of apply to uni based off the back of that, but you don't need any sort of prior qualifications. So, and in itself, it isn't actually a qualification. It's like a sort of passport to university, but you do all the same sort of grades as you would in your sort of final years of high school. So I did that, nearly didn't make it through because I was like, oh, it's just that struggle with commitment. And I was just like, oh, I don't want to, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. Like, I'm just gonna quit. And I was still binging at that time. I wasn't using sort of class A drugs every day, but I was definitely binging still. And towards the end of that year, I really started to, I'm not sure exactly what it was, but something was kind of changing. Like I'd mentioned in my part one, I always had this sort of, I've always had a sort of spiritual nature, which I guess everybody has, right? But I've always been interested in witches and sort of ghosts and weird sort of phenomena. My favorite book when I was a child was this encyclopedia, which is called The Greatest Mysteries of the 20th Century. And that was, I just used to read the stories over and over again of like these weird things happening, like spontaneous combustion and just weird stuff happening. So I've always been interested in, I suppose, things that are kind of taboo. And I think in a lot of ways, we're kind of moving out of that, but spirituality in terms of outside of organized religion does have this sort of taboo element to it. And again, I mentioned this in my part one, probably in more detail, but when I was around 17, I started to really, my spiritual senses really started to open up. Like in terms of, I would think about things and then the next day, the exact thing would happen, like weird, obscure things. I would just have these sort of quite ethereal experiences. And when I can sort of look back at when I was 17 now, I can see like my field was just opening up. And that was sort of 2011. So then coming into sort of 2012, that was when I really was like, okay, I think, like, I'm pretty sure I'm psychic. was that sort of time. And I had this sort of I experienced sort of like telepathic communication and that sort of thing. And, I was pretty sure that I was like creating my reality in a lot of ways, and, I could see that very, very plainly, and could see that there was this very spiritual level of reality, and had a lot of experiences of just, also with the use of sort of psychedelics and things like that. But I was very much realizing that the world was not as it seemed, and in terms of sort of conspiracies, sort of, become very aware of sort of 9/11 and, all that kind of stuff, all that sort of entry level kind of stuff. So, yeah, and I think that still kind of continued to an extent when I was in prostitution, because your intuition is very important when you're in that kind of work, and so I knew I was very intuitive. I definitely knew that. But by the time sort of 2014 kind of came along, and I was maybe starting to escape less, I suppose, and starting to maybe face myself a little bit more, I started to have very, very ethereal experiences of ghosts around me, beings around me, and out of body experiences as well. And so, come to the end of like sort of 2014, I had an out of body experience and I was abducted. And I would actually like to do a full video on abduction, and because it's a very misunderstood phenomenon, and one that is often painted in this light of like, oh, abductions are actually good for us, and this weird, that sort of starseed gone too far ideas, or concepts, new age taken way into that wacky zone where it's just not like got any kind of grounding in it at all. And so this was the end of, I think I actually remember the date. It was sort of October. Yeah, it was October. I think it was October 14th, 2014. And I had an out of body experience, and I was abducted. I was taken aboard a ship, and my and again, I will go into like a full video with this, but basically I had this sort of technology put inside me, and it tried to sort of take my eggs, basically. And I felt it all in my womb, although I was out of my body. If you've had out of body experiences, you know that you are also, you still have like a sensation of a body, if that makes sense. And this was, and I saw all these small gray aliens around me. I was strapped to a almost like a doctor's, like an operating table, basically. And it was such a visceral experience. It was like, I was fully out of my body. I could see these beings around me. And prior to that, I'd been floating along through the cosmos, having a lovely old time. And then I hit what was almost like a wall, which I think is like a sort of almost like a cage, like a sort of energetic cage, which is to trap people who are kind of maybe exploring a little bit too far for lower astral entities liking, shall we say. And probably didn't help that at the time, I wasn't clued up about protection. I wasn't clued up about any of this kind of stuff. I just had all of this sort of spiritual energy around me, and I didn't know how to use it. And so basically I ended up aboard this ship, and they tried to take my eggs. And luckily, and I don't know, it must have just been instinct, I realized I was strapped to this table, and I was just like, I need to get out of here. Like, I need to get out of here. And it's all happened very, very fast. And I was like, back to my body, back to my body, back to my body. And I just shot backwards, like through the sort of portals of which I came, I suppose, was pulled backwards through the cosmos, and came back through the sort of fourth dimension, I guess. And I saw my whole life flash before my eyes. It was like I saw everybody I'd ever known, everybody I'd ever kind of met, but all in the blink of an eye. And I just went boom back into my body, and it was such a terrifying, violating experience. I also think that because I had experienced so much sexual trauma, that I was probably a direct match to that experience. And what I have also learned from just, covering different sort of literature and things like that around these sort of great alien abductions is that they often pick people who have quite evolved emotional bodies, people who are very empathetic. We often, there's so much crap out there now about, empaths and blah, blah, blah. But empathy is a spiritual gift. It's something that you've likely earned over many, many lifetimes. And so when that happened, no one around me understood what the fuck had happened. And I was kind of aware that, like, I can't tell everybody I've been abducted by aliens. That's going to be weird, but even the people that were sort of close to me at that time who were, I had a very close friend at that time who was very into all this kind of stuff, and was, one of the people that would bring this kind of stuff into my field, around the occult and magic and spirituality. And, we were both Pisces and, reflected a lot of stuff back to each other. Even he was like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "I swear to God," and, thank God for the internet as well, because I was able to research and find out that other people have experienced abduction phenomena as well. And, I would have dreams. I never had another experience quite as potent as that, but I did have other dreams where I knew I had been abducted. And I knew that I was being essentially experimented on. And so it was like this, it was like this sort of violation. I really, for a long time, held a lot of trauma around that abduction experience. It was terrifying. It was so, that was not what I was expecting to experience. That was not, what I thought I was going to experience through astral travel, and I think, and this is one of the reasons why I am so passionate about mentorship. And, a lot of the people that feel called to do mentorship with me are people who have a lot of spiritual energy around them, but don't know how the fuck to use it, or sort of like, where do I go next? And that's what I was like, that's what I wish I had when I was young, because I had this really deep shamanic capacity because of various past lives I've had. And I know all this now because I've learned to read the Akashic records. I've had numerous readings from other healers and things like that. It's like I'm so kind of consciously aware of all this stuff now. But at that time, I didn't have that understanding. And so you kind of just feel lost in this mire of like, I know I'm really psychic, but I'm like wading through all this other stuff. And it's also kind of impacted by trauma. And, you cannot see super clear with precision as a psychic if your field is really, really dense with a lot of trauma. And, mine was at that time. And so I was always kind of battling with, is this my psychic perception or is this my deep paranoia from the traumatic experiences I've had? And so it was this constant sort of dance of like trying to discern that, basically. And so kind of going into, so I think I would have been 20 at that point. And when I turned 21, which is the 3/4 point to your Saturn return, I really started to, I think, take my spirituality a little bit more seriously and take my healing a little bit more seriously. That was probably the longest time in a long time that I didn't go on a lot of binges at that time. I still smoked weed and stuff, but it wasn't excessive. I wasn't really drinking alcohol. And I had a lot of past life dreams, really like, out there dreams of like ancient civilizations. And, I was starting to get more kind of spiritual messages coming through. And, I'd have all these dreams of like being like a priestess in like near the sort of Amazon and in these sort of ancient civilizations as well. And I knew that in these dreams I had this sort of spiritual power, and there was sort of crystal skulls. There was all this kind of stuff that I knew they were past life dreams. There was no doubt in my mind that that's what that was. It was so plain and so clear to me, because it was stuff that was so out there. People with sort of like dark skin and like copper hair, speaking light language. Again, I didn't know what light language was at this time, but I used to hear it in my dreams, and so there was a lot going on. And so it must have been around that time then I applied to university, after somehow managing to get through my course, and I got really good grades, and I got into Edinburgh University. And at that time it was like, I think I kind of knew already I wasn't gonna like make friends at university. I don't think I made one friend. I knew one girl from my college course, and we would sometimes see each other, but I didn't really make any friends at university. But I did have friends, from outside of that place, but I didn't really fit in with people, because as well, I was 21. I'd lived on my own since I was 17. These were people literally 18 years old, just leaving high school, just leaving home for the first time and stuff like that. So yeah. And Edinburgh Uni is notoriously bad for not being like inclusive of Scottish students and Scottish students having a really hard time there, because it's all these very, very posh English people. So that was a journey. And I actually won an award in my first year. I got the highest marks of my year, and I won some money and stuff like that. So I was sort of, I suppose, rediscovering like my love for research. I love research. Like I think I'm Virgo in the 12th house, and that to me is also like conjunct my Chiron, and yeah. But I really love research, and so I was at that time doing a lot of kind of investigation into what might be called conspiracy stuff, but I was going super deep with it with this friend that I had mentioned before, and we were just learning so much stuff about the world, and about sort of mind control programs, and just really opening ourselves up. And we also used to do this, we used to have these experiences where we'd stay up really late at night, and we'd end up channeling all this sort of universal information about the self, and sort of ideas about the universe, and we'd both sort of get pieces of information, and it was a really beautiful time. And so that's what I mean by I was sort of really deepening into my sort of taking my sort of spirituality more seriously at that time, in terms of really trying to honor the fact that this is like a sacred vessel. And yeah, I also, at that age, so when I was 21, I also experienced a shamanic call. So I had a session with a shaman lady, and it was like incredibly powerful. And she asked me afterwards, she sort of said, look, I'm doing this course, and perhaps it's something that you would be interested in. And at the time I kind of thought that maybe she just said that to everybody, kind of thing. But I knew other people that had visited her, and she hadn't mentioned that to them. And that's when I sort of could feel that this was like a call from spirit, and that was probably just her honoring that, sort of passing that message, being the medium for that message. And I sort of flirted with the idea, and I ended up saying no, because I just felt like I wasn't fully ready. I felt like, oh gosh, this is going to open me up even more. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. And I had to really honor that call. It's honor that call from within me to sort of go, okay, maybe this isn't the right time. Maybe this is like, I felt like it was too much. And that call would again return when I turned 27. So it's interesting how these things work, how it came around at 21, and then it waited again to come around when Saturn was coming around, or the sort of shadow of my Saturn return was emerging. So, yeah, so trying to think where I go next. So basically, I'm continuing at university. I turn probably 22 in like, what would this be, 2016, something like that. And, again, I'm still occasionally going on binges and that sort of thing. But I ended up meeting a really beautiful friend who's still my friend now. And that ended up in a romantic relationship. And that was the first relationship I had had since my ex, who had put me in hospital and all that kind of stuff. And so that was a whole journey in and of itself, because I really struggled to allow myself to be loved. And I think that's such a big thing for people that have been in difficult abusive relationships. It's like that when you meet someone that's actually really lovely and really kind and really caring, and also a Pisces, might I add. It's so beautifully divinely orchestrated that the next relationship I would have would be with a Piscean, because it's the two fish. And so he was so patient and loving and caring towards me. And I really, really struggled in terms of just, with trust, I think, was the main thing, of just like trusting that he wasn't going to be abusive towards me, that he wasn't going to cheat on me, that he wasn't going to abandon me. And so it was really hard for me to like let him in. And we went through this whole sort of journey together, and it was really nice to actually just experience a normal relationship. Like, there's no such thing as normal, but it's really nice to just be with somebody that wants to take you out and do just what kind of normal, and when I say normal, I mean functional, like do what couples do when they're functional, which I hadn't experienced before. Do what couples do when they're not drug addicts, basically. And although, we don't get me wrong, we had our couple party times and things like that, but it was never to the extent of what I had experienced before. And we did sort of fun things like go on holiday together, and that really sparked my love of travel again. I love traveling, and that was something that I hadn't done for years and years, was like leave the country. And so being able to do that with him, and he really just supported me in so many different ways, financially, spiritually, emotionally. And I think he really could see that I was on this. I was trying so hard to heal from all of this stuff. And I think it's one thing to just be living your life with friends and stuff like that, but it's when you get into those intimate relationships that all that stuff really comes up. And that's what it did for me. It was like new layers of healing from prostitution, new layers of healing from these abusive relationships. And it was just those years that I was with him, from sort of 22 to 25, it was like, it was hard. There was a lot of beauty and love, but there was a lot of me just like battling with myself and trying to just get on with life, and being in that relationship just brought up so much stuff. And sometimes I just felt like I was never gonna fucking heal. Sometimes I just felt like I can never do this. I can't be in these kind of relationships. I can't heal from this like sexual wounding, from rape, from all of that kind of stuff, and just from the damage that was inflicted to my body. I still have one leg that is a fair bit skinnier than the other from that incident with my ex-partner, and just all those things around your body having been invaded so many times. Yeah, I'm just laughing something about alien abduction, but it's that thing of just creating this sort of place where you feel safe within your body again. And that was such a journey for me, and still something I'm still learning and growing with. But it took a lot for me to unwind a lot of those really negative, repetitive patterns. And, at times I just sometimes just felt like I was completely insane and beyond repair and all of that kind of stuff. And during this time, the sort of high points of it were that I was still writing, I was still researching, and I got really, really into researching the transatlantic slave trade because that was my ancestral history on my mum's side, or part of my ancestral history. And nobody taught me about that in school. Nobody taught me about the horrors that went on during that and the strength that went on during that. And I always felt very, very removed from that history as well, because my mum was adopted by a white family in the UK. So I didn't have that connection. I didn't grow up connected with my Caribbean ancestry, which I think as well is one of the reasons why I felt like such a lost soul, because I didn't, I had all these experiences of racism, but I didn't have the Caribbean family going, well, look, this is where you come from, hun. I didn't have that. I was just kind of just floating around, and my mum had even less of that. At least I had my Black mother who had birthed me, and I could see that. But my mum didn't even have that. And my mom's 54. And so, for her growing up, it was even worse, and not having any kind of roots. And that's why my mum was so keen to have her own family, and why she had her family young as well, was because she wanted to feel that connection to something, to someone. And so there was all of that kind of stuff that I was reconciling with that deep ancestral trauma of displacement. And that's something that I've witnessed in this sort of ancestral Akash over and over, is that wounding of displacement when you're taken from your homeland. It's excruciating. It's the loss of that connection with the earth. And so that's why as well, I think so much of the work that I do now, it's like grid work, all of this stuff, like deeply connected with Gaia, because that's kind of the flip side, that the sort of full repairing of that cycle. And so during this time, it's like I would watch documentaries, all this kind of stuff about the transatlantic slave trade. And that was when I began to write a lot of poems based on that, because I was learning all of this stuff. It was blowing my mind. I was like, I can't believe that all of this happened. I can't believe I didn't know about that. I can't believe the brutality and, what people were doing to each other essentially during that time. And, it was also interesting to me the parallels of selling bodies. And that's what I used to do, was sell my body. And, it was bridging so many gaps for me. And so I began to write these poems, and I truly believe, and with my understanding of channeling and stuff now, I know that I was channeling my ancestors. I was channeling my African Caribbean ancestors and putting to rights what was removed from them and what they lost. And so my poems were very educative, you could say, about the transatlantic slave trade and about its parallels today, because what I was reading was that Black people were dehumanized and seen as lesser. And I was like, that's kind of similar to what I experienced growing up in Scotland. Was I was dehumanized and I was seen as lesser. I could probably write a book about all the racist experiences that I had when I was young, from people throwing stuff at me in the street to people shouting abuse at me and my mom when I was about 4 years old in the street, to the more covert stuff as well, that sort of underlying sort of more subtle levels of racism. I remember a girl saying to me in the class in primary school when I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, she was like, well, none of the boys would ever fancy you. And I was like, why? And she was like, well, because you're Black. And that was what she's picking up from the culture. How does an 8 or 9 year old, where are you getting that information from? That's what she's inferring from the culture around her, so I think it's important to recognize the imprints of those historical legacies and the parallels that they carry today, whilst also, coming out of a sense of victimhood around it, because that's what I had for so long. And, that, I think that was, I had to recognize that. Do you know what I mean? I felt so fucking victimized by life because that's what my experiences were showing me, you know, until you're able to take that more divine perspective of going, okay, there's a lot going on here multidimensionally. There is a lot of patterns of ancestral karma, of past life stuff, of, you know, there's so many things that are going on here that are not just limited to little me and my experiences, if that makes sense, you know? So it's it was such a, it's been a journey. But the poems that I wrote, I think were really important for me to write in terms of reconciling with certain things. And so that's what those kind of few years were sort of spent doing, was like really, really deep healing, soul searching, writing poems after poem after poem, and, you know, just really just trying to get on with life, and also doing my degree and, you know, writing essays and that kind of stuff. And so come to 2019. So I had, oh no, let's go back. Let's go 2018, right? So at the end of 2018, I had been on a god awful binge, and my mom knew I was kind of, you know, struggling, because that was kind of it. It's like I, you know, have ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs, and times where I was really, really sober and times when I wasn't. And so my mom contacted me and she was like, you know, I've got tickets to this event with Akala. So I don't know if you guys know who Akala is. Look him up, check him out. He's basically a polymath, historian, mathematician, total absolute genius. And I really, really resonated with a lot of the stuff he was sharing at the time. He was talking about the sort of legacy of the transatlantic slave trade and how that sort of impacts Britain, British history, Britain today. And so my mom had got tickets to see him talk at the Edinburgh Caribbean Association, and my mom had like randomly got these free tickets. And so we've gone along, and Cal has done this amazing talk. And at the end, there was some young people there, and they were there with an organization, and they were going to do some performances. And my mom, being my mom, was like, you have to perform. Can I please? Because my mom knew that I wrote all this poetry and my mom loved it. And people were telling me for years, you need to share your poetry. You need to, you know, just share it. And I was like, no, you know, there was no way I was ever going to get on a stage and share my work and all of that kind of stuff. I just felt like, no, there's no way I can ever do that. So my mom begged me. She was like, please, please, please do this. And I was like, right, fine. She was like, you are literally getting to share your poem in front of like your idol. Like, just do it. And so my mom's asked the woman who's running the event, she's like, please, can my daughter perform? And the woman said, yeah, of course, that's fine. And so they've called my name. I've gone up on stage and I shared my poem. And I got the biggest round of applause. People were just like clapping, like some people were like standing up, like I was like shaking. I'd like read it off my phone, and I got such a buzz. And Akala came up to me afterwards and he was like, oh my god, that was amazing, well done, and shook my hand. And, you know, I was sort of like, oh my god, like I can't believe I just did that. And it broke a wall for me. And so I never thought much about it again. Like that was November 2018. January 2019, I went away with my partner. We went to Vietnam. We had this like amazing time. I was sort of thinking like, I want to move to Vietnam. Like that's what I was thinking around that time. And then that it came into sort of March. So I just turned 25. And a girl who I was kind of friends with, who was at the event with Akala, messaged me and was like, you know, I loved you reading your poetry at that event. I'm doing an album launch. I would love to have you read some poetry. And it was one of those things, again, it was that crossroads. And I was like, okay, I have to do this. Like, there's no two ways about it. I have to do this. And so I agreed. And it was March 24th, 2019, 10 days exactly after my 25th birthday. And I went to, if anyone knows Paradise Palms in Edinburgh, that's where the event was. I went to Paradise Palms and I performed 2 poems. And I was shitting myself. I think I had 7 drinks before I went on stage, and it didn't touch me. It did not touch me until I got off the stage, and I was like, oh my God. Because just the adrenaline, you know, I was so nervous. And even now when I go on stage, I get really nervous. Like, I used to get nervous days before a performance. Now I just get really nervous just before. And because I'm naturally much more of an introvert, I am not a big performy kind of person, you know, and I really, and this is what the feedback people always give me after my performance. They're like, oh my God, it's like you're channeling something. It's, you know, there's this very spiritual element to my performance. It's not like musical, like I'm a musical theater star. Do you know what I mean? If you can see the sort of line I'm trying to draw there, it's like, it's not, it feels like it very much comes from somewhere else within me. And so I did that performance. It went down really well. And from there, I was asked to do another performance. And from there, I was asked to do another performance. And I didn't do that kind of classic thing that poets usually do, which is they do all these open mic nights and they really refine their sort of performance craft. And then they start to get a bit more attention and noticed a bit more. That didn't happen with me. I was thrown in the deep end straight away. One of the first gigs I did was a very well paid gig at the Fruit Market Gallery in Edinburgh. You know, it was like I'd just been fast tracked, and that was like amazing, exciting, and kind of just mind blowing as well. And I think that like everything happens in divine timing. I was obviously ready for it, or it wouldn't have happened. And I continued to do sort of performances throughout the summer, and I performed at Kelburn Festival. These things only make sense if you're Scottish, but I performed at Kelburn Festival, and I was approached by a director who came up to me and was like, hey, I really loved your performance. Can I get your email? I would like to contact you about an opportunity. So I said, yeah. And she contacted me and asked me if I wanted to be in her play. No audition, nothing, just asked me if I wanted to be one of the 3 main parts in her play. And this play was held at the Lyceum Theatre, and we ran for 3 years in a row and got great reviews and everything like that. And, you know, that was the thing. I liked drama at school, absolutely, but I didn't have any acting training or anything like that. It just, and, you know, these opportunities just kept coming to me, like just all these amazing opportunities. I was invited to Brazil to perform at a literary festival, all expenses paid, flights to Brazil, hotel, everything. And that was like October 2019. So I went to Brazil and met all these amazing women. And I think back on that time so fondly. It was incredible. I think it was mostly, they did have male poets, but it was something to do with like focus on women that year. So it was all these amazing female poets, and I just made such beautiful connections. And the history in Brazil is just so rich, and the culture, and I just loved every moment of it. And it was, again, one of those really, really healing experiences. And one thing that I was kind of struggling with at that time was all this success. All of a sudden, you know, all these people are sort of, you know, wanting me to do all these things. And I was sort of like overwhelmed by it. And I think it was triggering my still lower levels of self-esteem. So quite often before big events, I would go on a fucking binge a few nights before and things like that, you know, or I would self-sabotage basically. But not so much that it impacted my career per se, but it was just, I could still see where I was enacting these self-sabotaging behaviors. And it also, very sadly actually kind of caused some difficulties with my personal relationships as well. There was a lot of like jealousy from people around me about how much attention I was getting and things like that. And that was kind of hard. It was hard to see, and it was also hard to articulate because I couldn't fully kind of call it out, you know, and I wasn't in that place with like where I am now, where it's like, okay, I see that, so I'm going to feel into that. Does that mean that I step away from this? Do we need to have a conversation? Blah, blah, blah. I didn't have those tools, those intuitive tools in the same way. And so I would sort of not really know how to handle situations like that when I could feel that energy coming towards me. And yeah, that was definitely a challenge I had to work through. So yeah, so I continued kind of getting all these really wonderful opportunities and experiences, and going to different places, and doing these different performances, meeting all these different artists, and really kind of, I suppose, stepping into that role of a poet, you know, and really sort of embodying that more, I think. And so yeah, so then must have been the start of 2020, so before the whole COVID thing happened, I went and did my first ayahuasca ceremony. And again, this is something I want to do a whole video around, because ayahuasca has been very pivotal on my healing journey. I've done 7 ceremonies in total, spaced out over about 2 years, and they were so powerfully healing, just allowed me to access certain things in such a deep way that I think would have maybe taken longer had I not gone down that route. It was just such a deep access to my subconscious, and especially with all of that sexual trauma, with all of that pain in sort of interpersonal relationships and stuff like that, it just really allowed me to sit with that and release really deeply, and also connect more deeply with like certain higher aspects of myself and things like that. And also the first time that I properly sort of I'm not sure if I spoke it, but I really tuned into the light language and really tried to work out what it was, which still took me a while to actually work out what light language was after that. But that was really healing for me. So I did that in sort of January 2020 and March 2020 as well. I did 2 sets of ceremonies, and, you know, continuing my sort of poetry stuff. And then obviously COVID happened, and I, at that time, had gone to Barbados, which is where my mum is. My mum's mum is originally from Barbados. And my mum had sort of reconnected with her Bayesian heritage. As I'd mentioned before, she was adopted. And so she went through this whole journey of sort of going back to Barbados and just reconnecting with the land and, you know, all of that kind of stuff, going on this really deep healing journey. And I went to visit her, I think in maybe February 2020, and I loved it. I loved just being somewhere different. I loved connecting with my sort of ancestral roots there. And I then went back I must have got, I swear, one of the last flights out of the UK. And because I literally flew out to Barbados on like the 17th of March 2020, and there was like 3 people on the plane. I was one of them. And so part of me knew what was coming with the whole COVID thing, because I'd been reading on the sort of conspiracy circuit about a pandemic happening, or something like the planned pandemic happening, for years. Probably since about 2014, I'd been reading that something like that was going to happen. So it didn't completely shock me. And I'm not sure what it was that called me to Barbados, but I just knew I wanted to be with my mom. And I've got 5 brothers. I think I go into this in my part 1, but I've got 5 brothers, and the 2 on my mom's side were together in the same house, and then my other brothers were with my dad, and I had split up with my partner at this point. We were still friends, but we'd separated, and I just was really struggling with the idea of my mom being in Barbados on her own, and I knew she wasn't going to come back. So I was just like, fuck it, I'm getting on a flight. And I ended up stranded in Barbados for 2 whole months because there was no flights. And at one point I thought, I'm going to die on this rock. I'm going to die on this island. And, I'd be on the phone to my friends like, oh my God, I'm never going to get back, blah, blah, blah. And you know what? It's honestly one of my favorite memories. It was so hard. Like, it was excruciating at times because it was also like the culture shock. I'd spent 10 days in Barbados before, but when you're there for 2 months, you get such a different insight into the culture. And, there's things I love about Bayesian culture. There's other things I do not love at all. But I think I needed that. I don't think I would have probably spent 2 months there if I hadn't have been stranded in that way. And again, so profoundly healing, that relationship between me and my mom as well, because we have been so close since that. And although I've always loved my mom dearly, we've always had a difficult relationship because all of that ancestral trauma. My mom was adopted, so her mom gave her away. Her mom, so my grandmother, didn't speak to her mom. Her mom didn't speak to her mom. So I've said to my mom before, like, we are literally trying to repair this relationship. The women in our family probably have not had mother-daughter relationships probably for hundreds of years. And that's because during the transatlantic slave trade, they would often separate women from their babies. And there's been studies done in Brazil actually as well, which found that this sort of struggle to bond with the baby it's a protection mechanism, because it's like, well, my baby's going to get taken away from me, so why am I going to bond with it? And so that has been the pattern. And even my mom struggled to bond with me. She didn't struggle to bond with my brothers, but she struggled to bond with me. And that's because of that, again, that mother-daughter thing. And so I'm so proud of me and my mom, of how we have fought so hard to have this relationship. And it has been so hard at times, let me tell you, it has been so hard, but we have fought so hard. And I really think that the universe drew us back to where that separation happened, back to that same place where our ancestors were taken and that mother-daughter bond was broken. And we were taken back to that place at that time to repair that. And my mom was renting this room at the time, right, in this woman's house, like traditional Bayesian house. And my mom's renting this tiny room. And me and my mom are literally sleeping, what do you call it, like head to toe, top and tail, in this tiny little room. And so if it wasn't the universe saying, sort your shit out, I don't know what is more of an indicator than that. And so we both, whenever we talk right now, we're both in hysterics because we just have to make each other laugh and just be silly and have really difficult conversations. And we drank a lot of rum. I was still drinking alcohol at that time. We drank a lot of rum. We smoked a lot of weed, and but it was so profoundly healing. And we both just had very very interesting times. And yes, I'm always so thankful for that journey that we went on together. And so it got to kind of May 2020. Eventually they started the flights again, and my mom decided she was going to stay in Barbados, and I flew back. And I think I had got back maybe not even a week, and the whole Black Lives Matter thing had kicked off. And I personally do not align myself with that movement. I think that it is like this money grabbing thing, in terms of it's corporate. The woman who is supposedly the head of it, who I think is planted by the CIA, she is now like a multi-millionaire, and none of that money got redistributed into any like the Black American communities or anything like that. So it's like, it's very dodgy. And I also think the whole death of George Floyd, although I absolutely 100% believe that lots of Black people have been murdered by the police in the past, 100%, absolutely. Even up till present day, I don't believe that happened in the way that they said it did. I think it was a false flag. And it was just all very, very suspicious. And so I knew at this time that this was a ritual, that this was about energy harvesting, and but the issues behind it are very much real because I've experienced them. They're very, very real. And so I was sort of a little bit torn because I'd been asked to perform at a sort of, I suppose you could call it a protest, but a sort of march kind of thing for Black Lives Matter, because obviously my poetry covers a lot of that stuff. And I was kind of like, I don't want to take part in any energy harvesting rituals. I don't want to be seen to be advocating for this movement, but I very much see the roots behind it. Just because the movement is co-opted doesn't mean the movement didn't at one point stand in truth or at one point have validity to it. And in fact, often these things do. That's why it's hard to completely build upon a complete lie. It has to have truth within it in order to be made into something, a whole movement like that, even if it has a sort of darker agenda behind it. And so my intuition was telling me, just go, just do it, just, there's a reason why you're meant to be there. And so I went, I performed, and there was probably about 8,000 people there. And it was one of those things where it was at the bottom of Arthur's Seat, again in Edinburgh. If you know Arthur's Seat is the extinct volcano. I've had many, many experiences up Arthur's Seat. I used to go up there at night and see all sorts of things in the sky. And, it's a potent area. And it was very, very powerful for me to go and speak to the city that I grew up in about things that I had experienced and share my poetry from a place of wanting to come together, wanting to not be in a place of like division, and wanting everybody to understand where other people are coming from, and to kind of dismantle these colonial narratives around what it means to be someone of a certain skin color. And it was so alchemical for me. Thousands of people followed me on Instagram after that. It was like I had hundreds of messages from people, and I mean hundreds and hundreds of messages of people being like, oh my God, your poetry, the way you spoke, I get it now. I didn't get it before. Now I get it. And it was one of those things where I was like, holy shit. Like, and I remember afterwards, after the performance, my friends came, my brother came, and we went afterwards, we left and we got all these bottles of Prosecco, and my phone was blowing up. I had to just put my phone on silent because it was just like ping, 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 ping. And it was just crazy. And it was one of those things where I was just like, I knew that the work that I had been producing for all of those years, long before Black Lives Matter even existed, that I had been producing that for a reason. And it was so that one day it could meet that audience, and I am just the messenger, or the vessel for that message, which speaks to so many people's experiences. And that was one of the things that people used to always come up to me and say after my gigs was like, you put into words how I've been feeling. And that to me is such a gift, if you can kind of help people to formulate their own sense of how they feel about something. Sometimes our impulses, it's really hard to articulate them. And then when you hear someone else do it, you're like, oh shit, that's it. That's how I feel, And so it's been so powerful and beautiful for me to just be part of other people's journeys in that way, and I still get messages today from people that have come across my work somewhere along the line and are like, oh my god, I love what you write. And I don't write about colonialism anymore. I don't write about racism anymore. That's because that's not where I'm at. But I still appreciate some people are that's still relevant for some people. And so I keep my work out there that kind of talks about that stuff because I haven't had the call to delete it, And so, so, yeah. So, yeah, I just remembered as well that actually one of the first things within 3 months of me starting to perform, I actually entered a competition and received my first sort of publishing in an anthology and got to the finals of this competition called BBC Words First. And yeah, it's been really, truly an incredible journey with poetry and performance. And it's amazing to me because I was the shyest little girl in primary. You couldn't get me to say hello when they called the register. I would just wave my pinky finger. So I used to suck my thumb. And so to see where I'm at now, where I've performed on stages in front of thousands and thousands of people, is crazy to me. That is and so beautiful, because that from not having a voice, feeling like I didn't have a voice, feeling like I literally couldn't speak, to then having such a voice, is been amazing for me. And I used to always hear when I was kind of going through these sort of difficult times, like that there was more for me. I used to always hear that, like, there's more than this, there's more than this. And by God, I didn't know how much more there could be. So 2020, again, that was kind of like another next step with my career. And I performed a couple of other Black Lives Matter things, not affiliated with the movement itself, but just felt called to share my work and really give a sort of historical context to what was happening. And I went on to, we did the play again at the Lyceum Theatre. And yeah, so that was 2020 as well. And just kept having these really amazing poetic performance experiences. I was on the TV. I got picked up in like this fancy Mercedes, taken to BBC studios, and all this kind of stuff that was, it's very material, but it's there's fun in that. There's still fun in the material realm, So yeah, so then coming into, I suppose, the end of 2020, everything was still going really well with my sort of poetry stuff, but I was feeling kind of unfulfilled. There was something in me that was like unfulfilled, but I didn't know what it was. And at the start of 2021, I went through a really, really absolutely harrowing, challenging experience with the person that I thought was my best friend. And I had mentioned before about some people around me sort of being a little bit jealous about the things that I was experiencing. And that was even prior to the attention I was getting before the Black Lives Matter stuff. Then after, it got even bigger, and the people that I thought were closest to me, that I thought really loved me, I think felt jealous because they, for whatever reason, weren't feeling they were fulfilling what they wanted to do. And that was particularly with one friend, I should say. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but he basically betrayed me, shall we say, and turned out to be the complete opposite of what he claimed himself to be, and really broke my heart, and kind of I was very, very traumatized by what had happened and by what his the ripple effects of his behavior. And seeing that somebody could be so deceptive, and it was so weird. It was such a big initiation for me into the deepening of my psychic abilities, because I knew that something was off. Like I say, I felt unfulfilled. I felt like something was off. The energy was off. And I kept saying this to certain people around me. I was like, I just feel like something's going on, but I can't put my finger on what it was. Kept having all these weird dreams, which came to pass exactly as I had seen them. And I think what was happening was, because I was still, I wasn't really doing too much drugs, but I would, drink occasionally. I was still smoking weed. I wasn't fully committed to my path, shall we say. And that was then when when that had happened with that friend, and that caused this ripple effect where I then cut off quite a lot of people who were around me at that time, and who had been around me through my sort of healing journey, and had been around me through all the poetry stuff, and had been this sort of support for me and things like that. I cut it off. And because they had all shown themselves to be liars, essentially, and to be not standing in the truth. And what the universe was calling me to do was stand deeper in my truth. And so I, at that point, stopped drinking. I stopped smoking. Listen, I was such a rolly smoker. I thought that even if I gave up other stuff, I would never stop smoking cigarettes. I gave them up. I gave up all the drugs. I started going on these fasts and these juice cleanses. And you know what was weird was that it was so easy. Like, it was to give up these vices. It was like something just changed within me from that experience. And as painful as it was, and as many tears as I had about losing my best friend, who I used to spend almost every day with, my Piscean mirror, we were just so, I'd known him since I was 3 years old. We were literally the best of friends. You didn't see us without each other, and he understood all of my struggles, and, just saw me, I think, in a way that a lot of people didn't see me. And it really just sort of having to walk away from that. I think it was like I could kind of walk away from anything at that point, and the addictions just dissolved. I think the sort of fasting and the fruit cleansing and all of that really, really helped as well. But yeah, I just decided that I didn't want to live my life like that anymore. I didn't want to live my life in any kind of deceit, or any kind of not being in 100% true alignment with who I am. And I realized it was like such a slap in the face of like how psychic I actually am. And that was as well, was like the universe was like, wake the fuck up. Like, what are you doing? Like, stop it. Like, anywhere that you're holding these illusions, like, drop them, because you've got shit to do here. And I took a big step back from the poetry stuff. I knew that I had to do that because the poetry that I was performing was, again, about colonialism and history and my own trauma. And I knew I had to walk away from that. I should say as well, from 2020 to 2021, I did a master's degree as well. So I completed my first degree, and I went on to do a master's. And it's really funny to me that the first proper qualification I got is actually a degree because the sort of passport to uni thing doesn't actually count as a proper qualification. So that's always hilarious to me. But, so I'd done all of that kind of stuff, and I felt like I'd kind of done what I could with the poetry stuff at the time. And I turned down some really big opportunities. I turned down a lot of money because I was just like, I can't do this. My soul is calling me to do something different with myself. And when I say I went deep at that time, I went so deep. So I did another set of 3 ayahuasca ceremonies that, again, I will do a whole video about my sort of journeys with plant medicine. I've never felt called to ayahuasca again. She's always with me. She comes through in session. She's, I speak with her. Like, if she called me to ceremony again, of course, I would answer the call if it felt right. But though it was like I needed those 7 ceremonies, and that's been me, So I went super deep with that. And again, I shaved my head. I shaved my head because my hair was so long and it was such a defining part of my identity. And in the sort of poetry world, I was known for having this big, massive hair, and I could feel so much of that friend's energy in my hair. And I was like, it's got to go. And everyone thought, oh my God, she's insane. She's, stopping speaking to people left, right, and center. She's shaved her head. I think a lot of people who maybe don't understand those more kind of levels of like that deeper spiritual awakening thought that I was having a nervous breakdown. I wasn't. I had never been more sane, and I just, again, there was more relationships that I had that I just knew were no longer in alignment, and I could not maintain them because I had to be a false version of myself, and I was no longer willing to do that. And so I walked away again from some really close relationships that I had, which, is always sad. There's always a grieving process, but I knew that that's what I had to do. And I just sort of really focused on myself, and I didn't see a lot of people during that time. And this was 2021. And I was doing a lot of fasting, a lot of juice cleansing. I was having all these intense, amazing activations. I was seeing lots of different healers. I was like, because I had this money built up from all the poetry stuff. And I was just like, how can I use this money to just take this time for myself, like go even, deeper than I'd ever gone before, kind of thing. And it was such an amazing time. It was at times a really lonely time, and a time when, a lot of people didn't really understand what was going on with me. But I knew that I was being called deeper into something. And I also know that a lot of healers were called in 2021. 2020, 2021, I meet a lot of healers that was the year that they were called, and no different for me. And I did some shamanic training, quantum healing training. 2021, yeah. And I also did sort of celestial shamanic training, so sort of shamanism of the stars. And it kind of just unlocked what I already had, if that makes sense. Like it just always felt so aligned. And especially some of the quantum healing stuff, I met some really beautiful people that I'm still like best friends with to this day. We speak like every day. I found more of my people and connected with people like across the globe, and it was amazing, and I started to realize, I was like, damn, I was like, this is what I'm good at. Like all of the different sort of modules and things that we would go through, from the shamanic work to the quantum healing stuff, it was like I had found my thing where I just knew how to do it, and that's, again, harkens back to that sort of past life stuff. It's like, if you have done this over many lifetimes, when it's the time for you to be called into service in this life, and you find those soul aligned courses and things like that, it's like the way it happened for me was just, it was like I was just remembering. It was just activating me. It was just reminding me of what I already knew how to do. And I'd always had all this energy around me, but I wasn't always sure exactly how to channel it. And the poetry really helped me to channel that, and being around people who are also really intuitive and things like that. My friends used to call me the Oracle, because they just knew that I was tapped into something, and that's always been me. It's always been me, but it's being able to have all of the tools. That's where it takes a whole new different form and a whole new different level of like practice in your life, because you've now got all these tools to use it, and it was amazing. That part of my life, really difficult, because obviously as you're learning all these techniques, you're also using them on yourself. And I was doing so much akashic work, like just finding all these different past lives that needed clearing, all this ancestral stuff that needed clearing, all these cords, all these contracts, all of that stuff. So it was like intense, amazing. I was also really opening up galactically, and I think that's all, again, always kind of been there with me. I think that's why I probably had an abduction experience when I was 20 years old, and always felt these sort of beings around me, shall we say. But again, it's just, when you really commit to your path, everything just unlocks on a totally different level and accelerates, and that's exactly what happened. And so I was, just uncovering like who I was in a whole new way. And I then went traveling. I bought a one-way ticket to Mexico at the end of 2021 because I knew I needed to get out of Edinburgh. The vortex wasn't fulfilling me anymore. So I got that one-way flight and ended up in Mexico and traveled all around Nicaragua, Guatemala, Costa Rica, back to Mexico, went to Mount Shasta in California. And, that was over the course of almost a year. And during that time, I did another set of another course actually when I was traveling, and just really continued with that process of opening up, really harnessing, refining my channel and my ability to sort of bring through messages. And all this time I was doing a lot of practice sessions. I went crazy on the practice sessions, let me tell you. Everybody I knew got a session from me. And so I was really like refining my craft, and just which is a forever process, but I was really continuing to refine my craft and picking up all these new skills along the way. And there was times when I was traveling where it was just I was just being guided by spirit, and I would meet people and they'd be like, "Where are you going next?" I'd be like, "I have no idea. I don't know." Everything was just off the cuff with me. I never knew even the next Airbnb I was going to stay at or anything like that. It was just all totally intuitive, and just really deepening that relationship with my guides and my sort of higher self, and whatever you want to call it, and deepening my connection with the land as well. That's when the grid work stuff really started to open up for me. I've got whole videos about grid work, but yeah, just being called to different energy centers, working with them psychically, and yeah, it was amazing. Looking back, it was a really a challenging but a wonderful, wonderful time, and met so many soul aligned people. From having to let go of all those relationships, the relationships that have then come in have been, people that you meet and you're like, I've known you forever. Like our souls have known each other forever, and meeting other people that are just as into all the conspiracy stuff, but all the sort of psychic stuff as well. And you can support each other, and it's been so fulfilling. And so, yeah, then I came back to Edinburgh at the end of 2022, and I've kind of just been finding my way here since then. I should say as well, I started my own business I don't really like calling it business, practice, whatever, in I think it was February 14th, 2022. And kind of like with the poetry stuff, things just started to move in a way that just felt so divinely aligned and kind of orchestrated beyond far beyond anything I could fully picture. It's just me being in my purpose. And I had stopped writing for pretty much a year from when I went traveling to, it wasn't until not long before I came back to Scotland that I started writing again, and with a totally different voice. And just, I needed that time of like rest from that to be able to come back to it in a whole new way. And just, so now I'm writing again. And I perform occasionally. I perform when it feels right, when I feel really called by spirit. But before, I was so burnt out because I was basically performing full time, and it's exhausting. And so now if it's well paid, if it's, you know, feels aligned in my soul, then I'm more than happy to do a poetry sharing, shall we say. But if it's, you know, if it isn't something that really honors my soul, then I'm not doing it, you know. So yeah, trying to think if there's anything else I want to share. So yeah, I mean, since I've been back, I've just been very much like immersed in nature, which is kind of hard to do because I live in the center of the city. But you know, I just travel out all the time, and I sort of came to the realization that I really want to live a lot closer to nature, which is why I'm moving, and why I'm sort of going through, you know, still these immense changes and transformations. And look, I'm in my Saturn return, so it's always going to be Saturn returns are never going to be easy, I don't think, generally speaking. Not for anyone I've ever met anyway, but they're meant to challenge you. I'm still definitely going through these challenges in terms of I think just finding my flow with this next stage of my life that I'm moving into, and just trying to be patient and honor the process. And yeah, I think that's basically it for my part 2. And yeah, I'm just seeing if there's anything else I want to share. I think just thank you for like for, you know, if you've watched this all the way to the end, if you watched part 1, thank you for witnessing me and my journey and all its craziness and its sort of yeah, just in how it is, you know, witnessing it for what it is. And I really think for me, one of my gifts is like sharing synchronicity. Like I've had there's so much in my life that has been so profoundly synchronized, and I do believe everyone's lives are like that if you look for it and you see it, you know. And so everything in my life, I see it as having been so magical within all of these challenges. It has been such a incredible journey. And you know, at times, you know, I still experience low self-esteem at times, and you know, limiting beliefs come up and things like that. But fundamentally, I'm really overjoyed with who I am and what I do and my purpose, and filled with like this immense love for you know, my family and the people around me and my soul family and just the world. So yeah, so thank you for watching, and feel free to leave me any comments or send me a message, or if you have anything you want to share around this, please get in touch. So thank you so much, sending you so much love, and take care.